Hello there. Today, I'm going to tell you a story, one that haunted an entire town in the early 90s. It happened in under an hour. 7 innocent lives were taken in what would become one of the most disturbing cases in Illinois history. And the motive. According to the suspects, it wasn't money. It wasn't revenge. It was the thrill. A so-called desire to do something big. With no witnesses and no clear evidence, the investigation stalled for years. But before we get into the mystery, let's take you back to January 8, 1993. It was a Friday in this quiet suburb of Palatine, Illinois, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew their neighbors by name. At 10:30 p.m., snow was falling steadily, the last traces of holiday cheer still lingering in the cold air. Brown's Chicken and Pasta, a local fast food restaurant, had closed its doors for the night at 9 p.m. as usual. But something felt off. Families of the employees couldn't reach their loved ones. At first they brushed it off. Maybe Michael, one of the workers, had gone out with friends. No big deal. But by 1 a.m., worry turned into panic. Calls began flooding the Palatine Police Department. Family after family reporting they'd lost contact with their sons, daughters, husbands, and every single one of them worked at the same place, Brown's Chicken. That's when police realized this wasn't a coincidence. Something had gone terribly wrong. Officers were dispatched immediately. When they arrived at the restaurant, everything seemed normal. The building was dark. Tables were clean chairs stacked neatly on top. From the outside looking in, it seemed like just another closed business on a snowy night. But then they checked the back door, and it wasn't locked. Guns drawn, the officers entered the eerily silent restaurant. Inside, everything was still until they turned on the lights. What they saw next would stay with them for the rest of their careers. Blood on the floors. A trail that led them straight to the kitchen area, to the cold storage. They opened the west freezer first, and there inside were 2 victims. Stunned, they opened the east freezer and found 5 more. All had been shot at close range. Some had other injuries, but the primary cause of death was gunfire. 7 people gone. Among the victims were 50-year-old Richard Ellenfelt, the owner of the restaurant, and 32-year-old Thomas Menace, one of his employees. Both were found in the west cooler. Police confirmed the victims had no chance to escape, and the attack was swift, calculated, and devastating. What began as just another snowy Friday night had become a crime scene the entire country would soon hear about. The crime scene held clues, subtle, chilling ones. It appeared that the killer had used a mop one found inside the restaurant to clean the floors after the act. The implication. Whoever did this wasn't in a panic. They were calm, composed, perhaps even familiar with the layout of the place. It's as if they knew no one would be coming by after hours, so they took their time to erase their presence. Outside on the roof and near where the victims were found, police discovered at least 20 shell casings. The weapon used was believed to be a .38 caliber handgun. But despite their efforts, authorities couldn't trace where it came from. There was another small detail that stood out. Inside the dining area, all the chairs had been flipped upside down and placed on tables, standard closing procedure. All except one. A single chair positioned neatly by the order counter remained set up properly. That lone chair told a story. Even after closing time, someone had been dining inside. Was that last customer the killer, or did they see something they shouldn't have? Either way, they became the critical missing link in the case. The register from that night revealed something else. A final receipt, time-stamped at 9:07 p.m. on January 8th. The order included a combo meal fried chicken, 2 small buns, a side of fries, and a drink. The customer who placed that order had been the last one served before the massacre. Despite how clean the restaurant looked, police found a single trash bin inside. In it, discarded napkins, some chicken bones, a few fries. It hadn't been emptied. At the time, detectives weren't sure if that trash would mean anything, but they collected it anyway, placed it in cold storage just in case. In the days and weeks that followed, the investigation intensified. Police combed through nearby neighborhoods, interviewed relatives, former employees, anyone with a possible connection to the victims. Still nothing. The suspect had vanished without a trace. There was also a critical oversight. 2 weeks after the crime, officers realized there had been a gas station nearby, one that stayed open 24/7. One with surveillance cameras. But by the time they checked, it was too late. The footage had already been recorded over. Despite the massive manhunt, hundreds of investigators working the case, the only motive they could establish was robbery. But even that didn't make sense. Why kill 7 people over a few $1,000s? Frustrated, desperate, and under intense public pressure, the Palatine police reached out to one of the most renowned forensic experts in the country, Dr. Henry C. Lee, known as the Chinese Sherlock Holmes. Dr. Lee had worked on some of the most complex investigations in American history. Now the Brown's chicken case was on his desk, and he was about to uncover something no one else had noticed. On January 28, 1994, exactly 1 year after the tragedy, Dr. Henry C. Lee was invited to Palatine to assist in the investigation of the Brown's chicken murders. He meticulously reviewed crime scene photos, physical evidence, and police records. Through his reconstruction, he concluded the crime scene matched a robbery-homicide scenario. The trash collected from the scene aligned with the final receipt at 9:07 p.m. that evening. Dr. Lee examined the chicken bones and noted that only the wings were partially eaten. The rest of the combo meal had been untouched. This suggested that whoever ordered the meal wasn't there to eat. All employees were later found deceased, and there were no signs of struggle or random chaos. Everything pointed to a well-planned act carried out just after closing time. Based on these patterns, Dr. Lee believed the final customer could be the main suspect. The timestamp on the receipt showed 9:07 p.m., but the restaurant was scheduled to close at 9:00 p.m. In the U.S., strict adherence to closing times is common, and customers are usually not served after hours. So why was an exception made? Dr. Lee suspected the person may have been a familiar face, someone the staff knew and trusted enough to serve past closing. Even more telling, the combo ordered included only 1 wing, yet 2 wing bones were later found that suggested the staff may have added an extra piece, something they might only do for a regular. Bite marks were found on both ends of the wing bones, meaning saliva was likely present. Dr. Lee saw this as a key opportunity to extract DNA evidence. In 1994, DNA technology was still relatively new, and many departments, including Palatine's, had never used it before. The amount of saliva was also minimal, making analysis difficult at the time, so Dr. Lee advised preserving the bones until technology improved. Years passed. The case stalled, but in 1998, DNA science made major strides. Investigators managed to retrieve a full profile from the wing bone sample. The problem. At that time, the U.S. still didn't have a complete national DNA database. Each sample had to be manually compared, a slow and expensive process. Even after 5 years, no matches were found. With no suspect and no fresh leads, the Brown's chicken case remained unsolved. On March 25, 2002, 9 years after the murders, a woman named Ann Lockett came forward with a tip that would change everything. Ann told police that her ex-boyfriend, James Degorski, along with another man named Juan Luna, were responsible for the Brown's chicken murders. She described a chilling memory. Just 1 day after the murders, James had called her and told her to turn on the television. News of the crime was everywhere. 7 people killed at a local fast food restaurant. And James, he sounded proud. He said that he and Juan had done it. Not long after, both men began bragging to Ann about details of the crime, but she was too afraid to speak up. James had warned her to stay quiet, or there would be consequences. For years, Ann lived in fear. Eventually, she and James broke up, but it wasn't until nearly a decade later, when she confided in her new partner, that she found the strength to go to the police. At first, investigators were skeptical. Over the years, they had received thousands of leads, none of them useful. But then Ann shared a detail that no one outside of the crime scene could have known. She said that after one of the victims was shot, he had reacted in a way that left a mess on the floor. James, she claimed, had cleaned it up with a bloodied mop to make sure he was really gone. This was a detail never made public, and it got detectives' full attention. From that moment on, the investigation reignited. Police quietly began surveillance on the 2 men. They learned that Juan Luna had once worked at the same Brown's Chicken. He was also of Hispanic background, something that aligned with earlier behavioral profiling. Juan had initially been cleared thanks to an alibi. But when detectives tracked down Eileen, the woman who provided it, she admitted the truth. It was fake. James and Juan had shown up after the crime and paid her $50 to lie on their behalf, and then came the breakthrough: the DNA. Juan's genetic profile was a perfect match to the sample taken from the chicken bones 4 years earlier. On May 16, 2002, nearly a decade after the murders, police arrested James Degorski and Juan Luna. After long hours of questioning, both men eventually confessed, at the time of the crime. They were just teenagers. Both had records of delinquency, drug use, cruelty to animals, and disruptive behavior. They had been known troublemakers. In a 44-minute confession video, Juan calmly described what happened that night. "We wanted to do something big. We wanted the thrill. I used to work at Brown's, so I knew the layout. I knew they closed at 9 p.m. sharp, and they didn't have an alarm system. We waited until the very end. I went in right before closing, placed an order, and waited. They knew me, so they let me in. Once I was inside, I waited for James to come in through the back. It was the night of January 8, 1993. Snow was falling thick across Palatine. Juan Luna entered the Brown's Chicken restaurant just before closing. As expected, no other customers were there, only the staff and the owners. He ordered a meal. The employees recognized him. He used to work there, so they allowed him to order even after 9 p.m. They even added an extra chicken wing, his favorite. He sat down, eating slowly, waiting for James. Moments later, James Degorski entered through the back door. He quietly locked it behind him. He was wearing gloves. According to Juan's confession, what happened next unraveled quickly. One employee noticed something was wrong and tried to leave, but James reacted. The rest of the staff were herded into the back area, into the walk-in coolers. What followed Juan described was far more than what they'd planned. Originally, they claimed the intent was just to rob the place, but when the staff didn't cooperate the way they expected, the situation escalated. Even so, their story didn't quite add up. They brought extra ammunition. They stayed afterward to clean the scene. Then they took the day's cash and left. It was more than just a robbery. On May 10, 2007, based on DNA evidence and witness testimonies, Juan Luna was found guilty of 7 counts of first-degree murder. One juror opposed the death penalty, so the sentence was reduced to life in prison without parole. On September 29, 2009, James Degorski was also convicted thanks to the testimonies of Ann Lockett and Eileen, who had previously fabricated his alibi. He too received life without parole. From the night 7 people lost their lives in 1993, to the arrests in 2002, and the convictions in 2007 and 2009, justice took 14 long years. For the families, those years were filled with grief, pain, and unanswered questions. The case cast a long, dark shadow over the town of Palatine. The Brown's Chicken chain never recovered. Sales dropped by 35%. More than 100 locations in the Chicago area eventually shut down. The original crime scene building sat empty for years. It was briefly turned into a laundromat, but that business failed too. In April 2001, the structure was torn down. Today, a Chase Bank stands in its place. This case, like many cold cases, wasn't unsolved because no one tried. It was a matter of time, of technology, of one voice finally speaking up. Because in the end, there is no such thing as the perfect crime. This is where today's story ends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.